There comes a moment in life, often quietly, often after decades, when you realize that not every relationship ages as gracefully as you have. And let's be honest, have you ever felt a quiet rage when a friend made you the punchline of a joke, or when a family member dismissed your worth, belittled your choices, or treated you as less than? But instead of speaking up, you smiled politely and let it pass, even when something inside you cracked just a little. We often remain trapped in toxic relationships that, instead of enriching us, harm us. However, for fear of losing important people, we continue to maintain those ties. It is essential to understand when a relationship becomes more harmful than positive, and find the courage to make the necessary decisions to preserve our emotional and mental balance. I'm Vernon. Today, I want to share with you 6 unmistakable signs that it may be time to consider cutting ties, even with family or friends, and the profound wisdom that supports making such a difficult but potentially life-transforming decision. Pay special attention to sign number 4. It's one that I've seen cause the deepest anguish among my clients, yet is rarely discussed openly. We carry guilt, obligation, and unspoken resentment, simply because we've been told it's unkind to walk away, especially from family. But wisdom says otherwise. Seneca, the Roman philosopher, once wrote, "Associate with people who are likely to improve your, welcome those whom you are capable of improving. The process is a mutual one." So, if this message speaks to something you've been quietly carrying, consider subscribing to the channel and sharing this video with someone who might need to hear it today. We'll continue to spread the kind of wisdom that brings peace and not just knowledge. Now, let's walk through these 6 signs together, each one a gentle but firm reminder that your peace is worth protecting. Sin number 1. When your self-worth is consistently undermined. Aristotle, in his Reflections on Friendship, made an observation that still echoes today. The excellent person is related to his friend in the same way as he is related to himself, since a friend is another self. In essence, a healthy connection should reflect the same respect and care we offer to ourselves. I learned this the hard way. Years ago, I maintained a long-standing friendship that, over time, began to wear me down. The comments were never overtly cruel, just subtle jabs about my appearance, my memory, my relevance. I'd leave conversations laughing on the outside but shrinking on the inside. It wasn't until I caught myself hesitating to speak in other relationships that I realized the damage being done. I had started to question my own voice. Psychological research on aging reveals how powerful self-perception truly is. A landmark study in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that older adults exposed to negative stereotypes about aging performed significantly worse on memory tests than those exposed to positive ones. This isn't just about hurt feelings, it's about how repeated undermining can accelerate cognitive decline, weaken emotional resilience, and diminish our overall quality of life. The insight I eventually came to wasn't that we must protect ourselves from all feedback. It was this: there's a profound difference between loving honesty and habitual criticism disguised as care. How do we reclaim our self-worth when it's been slowly chipped away? Here's what helped me start. I began noticing how I felt after certain interactions, not just in the moment, but hours later. I started journaling briefly after conversations, tracking whether I felt energized, anxious, small, or seen. Over time, clear patterns emerged. I created small, quiet rituals to affirm who I still was. A few lines in a notebook each morning, a cup of tea with music that reminded me of who I've always been. Moments spent with people who didn't need me to shrink in order to feel big. And most of all, I reminded myself daily, someone else's version of me is not my truth. I have lived decades full of growth, hardship, triumph, and tenderness. That lived experience has value even when others forget to honor it. Because the moment you begin protecting your sense of self even silently, the erosion begins to stop. Sing number 2. The one-way street of emotional labor. Some relationships don't collapse all at once. They wear you down slowly, not through conflict, but through quiet neglect. Over time, the balance of give and take fades, and you're left doing all the emotional heavy lifting. Thomas, 72, a retired accountant, had kept in touch with his old college roommate Richard through weekly phone calls. But the conversations were always one-sided. Richard spoke at length about his own problems, while Thomas's attempts to share his grief, volunteer work, or health concerns were met with distraction or quickly brushed aside. Over time, Thomas came to a quiet realization. Richard didn't really know anything about his life. He rarely asked questions, remembered little, and seemed uninterested when the focus wasn't on him. This kind of imbalance isn't just emotionally draining, it's physically harmful. Research in the Journal of Gerontology shows that one-sided relationships can increase stress hormones in older adults, which in turn weakens immunity, disrupts sleep, and contributes to chronic illness. The ancient Greek concept of philia, true friendship rooted in mutual goodwill, reminds us that connection must be reciprocal to be nourishing. When the exchange becomes one-sided, what remains is no longer friendship, but obligation. Dr. Laura Carstensen, head of Stanford Center on Longevity, calls this natural shift with age socio-emotional selectivity. We become more selective, not because we're withdrawing, but because we finally understand the value of our emotional energy. So how can you tell when emotional labor has become one-sided? Ask yourself, when was the last time this person truly listened? Do they show care, or just take comfort in being heard? Do you leave the interaction lighter or heavier? This week, try making a small 2-column list of your closest relationships. On one side, write what you give. On the other hand, what you receive. This isn't about keeping score. It's about recognizing where you're being nourished and where you're being drained. Which relationship in your life feels most out of balance right now? Share in the comments. Your story might help someone else recognize their own. Because in the next sign, we'll go even deeper into the quiet ways our physical health begins to speak up when emotional boundaries are crossed. Sign number 3. When physical health begins to suffer. Let me tell you about my friend Eleanor, 65, who has always been vibrant and independent. She stayed in frequent contact with her adult son, despite a troubling pattern that unfolded over time. Their conversations often left her drained. He would criticize her past decisions, question her abilities, and make frequent demands on her time and finances. Soon, Eleanor began experiencing unexplained symptoms, migraines, high blood pressure, and insomnia. With no medical cause found, she started tracking her patterns and discovered a clear link. Her symptoms always worsened after speaking with her son. Her body had been warning her long before her heart was ready to accept the truth. The mind-body connection is now well established in medical research. A study from Carnegie Mellon University found that chronic psychological stress impairs the body's ability to regulate inflammation, leading to increased risk for heart disease, diabetes, and other conditions. For seniors, whose health may already be more vulnerable, this connection becomes even more significant. The ancient wisdom traditions understood this connection intuitively. The Sanskrit concept of ahimsa, non-violence, not just in deed, but in relationship, recognizes that harmful interactions create ripples of suffering that extend into physical well-being. I encourage you to become a scientist of your own experience. Pay attention to how your body responds to different interactions. Do certain people leave you feeling energized, while others leave you depleted? Does your sleep suffer after certain phone calls? Do you experience physical tension, headaches, stomach distress, chest tightness in anticipation of specific encounters? Your body's wisdom deserves to be honored, especially now. Consider keeping a simple health journal that tracks both physical symptoms and social interactions. The patterns that emerge may provide clarity when your heart feels conflicted. As we've explored these first three signs, the undermining of self-worth, the one-sided nature of emotional labor, and the impact on physical health, a pattern begins to emerge. These are not mere inconveniences or normal relationship challenges. They represent fundamental imbalances that can seriously compromise our well-being in our senior years. Each sign is powerful in its own right, but there's one that cuts even deeper, often cloaked in love, duty, or history. It's the one I urged you to pay special attention to at the beginning of our journey. Sign number 4. Manipulation through past obligations. We now arrive at sign number 4, perhaps the most insidious of all: manipulation through past obligations. Philosopher Immanuel Kant once said that true morality is treating people as ends in themselves, not as means to an end. But too often, past kindnesses or family roles become silent weapons, used to demand obedience in the present. This kind of emotional manipulation creates what psychologists call a debt relationship, built not on love or mutual respect, but on a running tally of what you owe. It's a distortion of genuine care. A public example of this dynamic is Tina Turner, who spoke openly about walking away from not only a deeply abusive marriage with Ike Turner, but also from extended family members who tried to guilt her into continued support later in life. In interviews, she admitted that as she aged, she realized how often people invoked her past what she owed them for emotional leverage. Her decision to cut ties was not easy, but it was essential to reclaim peace and autonomy in her later years. This echoes the Buddha's teaching. In the end, only 3 things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you. What was once freely given should never become a chain around your present. Research from the National Center on Elder Abuse reveals that 1 in 10 older Americans experience emotional abuse, and a large portion of it involves guilt-based manipulation, especially within families. What makes this so painful is that it corrupts something sacred: the history of love and care we've built. So, how can you tell if you're caught in a guilt trap? Listen for phrases like, "After all I've done for you, you owe me this. If you really loved me, you would." These aren't expressions of love, they're attempts to bypass your autonomy. What can you do? Reflect honestly. Are you acting from gratitude or from obligation? Write down interactions that leave you feeling emotionally indebted. Consider practicing what therapists call boundaries, compassion, offering care without surrendering your agency. The wisdom of letting go isn't only about material things. Sometimes it means releasing relationships that have become little more than ledgers of guilt. Many people stay in relationships long after they've turned into emotional debts rather than mutual connections. I'd like to stand with those who are learning to choose peace over obligation, 1 step, 1 boundary, 1 breath at a time. Sign number 5. Persistent boundary violations. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from overwork, but from having your boundaries repeatedly ignored. I remember a period in my early 60s when I had clearly asked a longtime friend to avoid calling after 9 p.m. I had been struggling with sleep, and those late-night calls left me drained the next day. But the calls continued. Each time, I'd repeat my request gently, sometimes firmly, only to hear, "Oh, I just needed to talk for a minute," as if my needs were negotiable. It wasn't the disruption alone that wore me down, it was the subtle message that my time, my rest, and my choices didn't matter. That experience taught me something that has stayed with me. When someone consistently disregards a boundary, they are revealing how little they value your autonomy. Research from the Institute on Aging shows that older adults whose boundaries are routinely violated experience significantly higher levels of anxiety and emotional fatigue. Over time, these boundary breaches don't just frustrate us, they erode our sense of self-worth. So what can we do? First, be unapologetically clear. State your boundaries in language that is firm, not defensive. Second, notice the response. People who care for you may slip once, but they will adjust. Those who persistently test your limits are telling you something louder than words. Third, reinforce your boundary through action, not just words. Let missed calls go unanswered. Shorten visits, or step back from interactions that repeatedly cross the line. And remember, the ability to say, "This doesn't work for me," is not a rejection of others, it's a declaration of self-respect. Your later years are not a time to shrink your world for others' convenience, but to shape it around what nourishes your peace. Move toward our final sign. We'll explore one of the most overlooked signals that a relationship no longer belongs in your life. Sin number 6, the absence of growth and joy. When we enter the later chapters of life, joy and growth aren't luxuries, they're necessities. A relationship that lacks both doesn't just leave us flat, it slowly drains the very vitality we've spent decades cultivating. Not every connection needs to be uplifting every moment, but over time, it should help us expand, not contract. Dame Judi Dench, now in her late 80s, made the quiet decision to distance herself from several long-standing friendships when she recognized they were sustained more by nostalgia than by inspiration or support. Over time, she realized that these relationships no longer contributed to her growth. They preserved the past rather than fueling the future. By letting go, she created space for new connections, including with younger artists, which in turn rekindled her creativity and brought a renewed sense of joy into her life. This speaks to what psychologists call a depleting relationship, one that consistently takes more than it gives. Dr. Barbara Fredrickson's research in positive psychology has shown that emotions like joy and curiosity don't just lift our mood, they build resilience, memory, and emotional capacity. When these feelings are absent from our relationships, our well-being quietly withers. The ancient Greek ideal of eudaimonia, life of flourishing, reminds us that meaningful connection must involve growth, renewal, and mutual inspiration. Without them, even long-term relationships can become emotional dead weight. So how do we recognize this? Ask yourself, do I generally feel lighter or heavier after time with this person? Have I learned or grown through this connection in the past year? Does this relationship help me feel more like myself or less? If the answer consistently leans toward heaviness and stagnation, it may be time to reevaluate how much space that relationship deserves in your life. And now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever stepped away from a long-term relationship because it no longer brought joy or helped you grow? Leave your experience in the comments. It may offer clarity or courage to someone else who's quietly wrestling with the same decision. Conclusion: the 6 signs we've discussed today. The undermining of self-worth, one-sided emotional labor, physical health impacts, manipulation through past obligations, persistent boundary violations, and the absence of growth and joy are not merely abstract concepts. They represent real patterns that can diminish the quality of our remaining years. The decision to distance oneself from toxic relationships, even with family members, is never easy. It comes with grief, doubt, and often the judgment of others who don't understand. Yet this difficult choice may also represent the most profound act of self-respect and wisdom. I want to offer 3 practical steps as you consider the relationships in your life. First, Practice graduated distancing rather than abrupt severance when possible. Reduce frequency of contact, shorten visits, and limit exposure to triggering topics before making a final decision to cut ties completely. Second, create a support network of understanding friends or professionals who can validate your experience and provide perspective during this difficult process. Isolation makes us more vulnerable to doubt and manipulation. Finally, remember that cutting ties with toxic individuals doesn't require public declarations or dramatic confrontations. Often, the quieter path of simply redirecting your time and energy elsewhere is both kinder and more effective. What I wish for each of you is not the absence of challenging relationships, but the wisdom to distinguish between relationships that challenge you to grow and those that simply drain your life force. I believe that in our senior years, this question takes on special urgency. We have accumulated the wisdom to recognize what nourishes us and what depletes us. And if this video has resonated with you, helped you feel seen, or sparked a moment of clarity, hit the like, sharing it with someone who may need to hear this, and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps bring these conversations to more people who are quietly searching for peace, strength, and permission to put themselves first, perhaps for the first time. Thank you for sharing this journey with me.